It's very depressing. Right, all right, dear. We're going to see a photograph of the Paris exhibition. Would be the first one. Here it is. Isn't it, Mark? These are the very last pictures, which I actually haven't put in the lecture, but these are the last ones he did. And this lovely young man here, well, he's not that young now. This is a 6-year-old. This is Christopher. And he's a psychologist.
Psychiatrist. Psychiatrist or psychologist?
I think he's a psychologist, actually. But he now has really taken over the responsibility of the foundation, because they created the foundation. And I thought this was such a splendid picture of him, and that's his favorite picture. Mark Rothko himself was born in what was then Russia, but is now Latvia. And he was Marcus Rothkovich, and he was born in something called Dvensk in Russia. And he came to America when he was 10 years old. They were pharmacists. The family were pharmacists. They were an educated family, and the father came to America because it was Rothko was born in 1903, and the family actually came, I think, 1913. And basically, in Russia, they were in the area which was called the settlement, and it was the place where Jews could live outside the main cities. But at the time that the family left, there was an enormous amount of particularly Cossack attacking the Jews, and the cousin of the family had already left for America, and they had gone to Portland, which is right the other side of America, and they were called the Weinstein brothers. And again, they were pharmacists, and so when the Rothkovich came over, they went straight to Oregon. And there's a terribly sad interview with Rothko talking about himself as a 10-year-old boy, with the wrong clothes. And their ship sort of went to his mother and his 2 brothers and his sister, and they were all in the wrong clothes, and they had to go all the way over to Oregon, which is right the other side of America. And he said it was so terrible. He couldn't speak English at all, but he was a clever boy, and he got a scholarship to Yale. And he was in Yale from 1921-22, but the scholarship only lasted a year, and he had to make money to continue to stay there. And he worked and did all sorts of things, but in the end he decided actually it was a very, very white sort of Christian place, and he felt tremendously outside of it. So in the end, he left. No question of him being an artist at this point, but he went to New York simply because New York was a place where more people went. And he got to New York, and he actually went. He started drawing then, and he went to something called the Art Students' League, and we're talking about 1925. And very, very briefly, he worked with Max Ernst, because Max Ernst later on, not quite at this point, of course, came to America with Peggy Guggenheim when the war started. But he started to draw. He went to the Art Students' League, and he had a sort of put an exhibition on. Well, he put a couple of paintings in an exhibition in 1929. But by the time 1940, he was totally committed as a painter. Let's put the next one on, and I'll show you what happens then. Because this is a very, very, very famous. You see, they were called the Irascibles, and these were the group who are later on going to be the abstract expressionists, and they're all here. And you can see Mark Rothko is on the right here at the bottom here, and you can see who they all are. The one woman at the top there, but the rest, there's de Kooning, there's Gottlieb, Reinhardt, Poussedat, Baziotas, Pollock, Clifford Still, Motherwell, all of them. Stamos, Jimmy Ernst, everybody. Jimmy Ernst was the son of Ernst, and he was the one who got the group together. And they were all, there was Peggy Guggenheim's gallery that they all showed in. Now, this particular group are very interesting because they are the general group which are abstract specialists. And the interesting thing is that there's the uptown group and the downtown group. Now, the downtown group were the drinkers. I have to say they were the Christians, not the Jewish people. All the Jews, they're not drinkers. I don't know why. So the downtown lot was spent their entire time in the Cedar Bar, and that Pollock was, of course, pastor. He was the one, but the other ones, people like Gottlieb and so on, and Motherwell, they were called the Uptown Group, and they were actually, it was Betty Parsons after Peggy Guggenheim went back to after the war. It was Betty Parsons who really supported them and began to show them. Okay, let's put the next one on, because here you see very, very interesting early Rothko. That's a self-portrait, and it's 1936. And later on, we'll talk about his love and obsession with Rembrandt. But the Rembrandt, which is the one he saw, because it actually in the Met, and it's a self-portrait of 1660. And so we're looking at self-portrait 1936, and we're looking at one of the very earliest paintings. Look at the color scheme, and particularly look at the strain. It's really. I mean, it's very, very American in its influence, really, and it's called The Street Scene, and it's again the same time as his painting. Look at his brushstroke, in particular his color. This is what he was working. Now, the thing that he was absolutely obsessed with was the next one. We'll put the next one on, and you'll see that this is. I'm so cross with myself because we've recently come back, as you know, from this extraordinary trip to New York and America generally, and we didn't go and look at this, and it's actually in the Met, and it's a Roman fresco, and of course it came from Vesuvius. I mean, it came from the collapse of Pompeii. And it came actually to America in 1900. Now, I particularly want you to see the surface and the way that the kind of the architectural point of the picture, because this is something you're going to see him continually use. But what is very interesting, this picture here is a Rothko, and you see how much he's influenced by this. And according to Kate, when she talks about him when she was a little girl, they used to go to the Met all the time, and this was one of his favorite things to do. This particular one it was a fresco from a villa, and a Pablis Sinistra, and it was roughly 4th to 5th century. It was rediscovered in 1900. And this is when it went to the Met. We didn't actually see it. I'm still very cross with myself that we didn't. I've never been to Pompeii. Some of you have, but I haven't seen it.
We did exhaust everything at the Met, though, so maybe it wasn't open to the
perhaps
public.
It wasn't open. I don't know, really. We didn't know about it. Very wrong of us. Okay, next one, because this is interesting. These are marvelous. These are early, very, very interesting Rothkos. And this is when he was completely obsessed with the underground. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to New York, but those of you who have and have been on the underground, you know how slightly sinister it is. It's the only way to describe it. It's dark and frightening. In my case, you never knew where you were going. So I always found it very worrying. And I find these absolutely amazing. And this is the entrance to the subway. And this is 1938. And that's a detail. Now, I want you particularly to notice the use of the architectural position of them. You'll see these huge pillars in almost every one. Now, he did a great many series of these, and of this for about the next 2 years. He used to work on these pictures. Let's look at the next one. This one, actually, the next one, which I think it's called Untitled, but it's obviously from the same sort of imagery. And this one is 1935, and the detail, just as a matter of interest, this now belongs to Kate Rothko. I think it's interesting when I could find the ones that did belong to her, and Christopher, I put those down. But look at these. These are wonderful examples, because these are taken. Camilla took these from the original ones. Look at the brushstroke, look at the way, and particularly the sense of claustrophobia. I think we always have to remember that Rothko himself never really belonged in America. He said he always felt slightly an outsider. He was, I mean, he could speak, he could read Latin. I mean, he was very, very clever man. And he, of course, he had, but towards the end of his life, Kate said, he had difficulty in remembering Russian, perhaps he didn't want to. But this one actually is 1935. Okay, next one is all done. This is much more sophisticated. And these are interesting. They're slightly later. This is again 1930s. I think this is 1937. And this one, the fantasy, is 1940. This is 1937, 38. And it's again untitled. And the strange thing about these pictures is they give you this sense, as I've said, of this strangeness of the New York underground. The people are almost ghosts. I mean, they're as sort of as insubstantial, really. And again, it is the pillars. They almost look like prison. It looks like a prison, doesn't it? This one particularly is interesting. This is the only one, again, that is labeled. This is called Underground Fantasy. And this is late. This is in 1940, because he was now beginning to know a little bit about European art. Okay, next one. This again, as this is still owned. This one is just called The Subway, and this is 1937. But look at the people. Look at the extraordinary sense of space here, and you do get that vague, curious, dark, creepy feeling by looking at them. They're extraordinary pictures. I was very glad to see these. Okay, next one. We just didn't know them. Now, these are slightly more. He's moving slightly, painting people. As I said, he's got himself involved. He's drawing. And this one is untitled again. It's 1938-39. And it's called Family, because here, this group of the family here. And I don't quite know this one, piece of architecture here, but these are very strange, because untitled again, this is 41. These now belong, they're in Washington, in the National Gallery in Washington. But they sort of look mid-European, don't they, these people, in the way. They don't, they look sort of disturbed in a strange way. The next two are unusual, because we don't usually think of him as figurative painter. And these nudes, the one on the left is 36. You'd never have known that this was a Rothko. And the one on the right is slightly more, perhaps, because again we've got this sense of chair and the sort of the architectural space of this nude. And they're both untitled, but they're both 1936. But the next one is interesting, because he's actually talking, because what I should have told you is that he married twice. He married his first wife was a jeweler. The marriage didn't last. It was, she was disappointed. He wasn't making any money, and she felt herself, it didn't work. But it was I think it was about 1930. I forget exactly, I've got the date somewhere, that he married Mel. And Mel is the mother of these two children. And this one on the left is called Family. And this is 1938. This is in a private collection. But by this time, he's got tremendously involved, as most people were at this time, interested in Freud, but particularly classical literature.
Surrealist.
And these are all about sort of the Greek and the Roman myths. This one, this strange one on the right, is the I can never say it, the Aeolian harp. I'm not saying it right.
The Aeolian.
The Aeolian. I'm not saying it right exactly. This is 1946, and now we're beginning to see, particularly here. Of course, they've got the one child. They came. She was much. She was younger than him. She was a book illustrator, and she was much younger than him. And they married, and they had Kate. I think they had Kate in 1950. Okay, next one. These are very interesting and very strange, but these, I suppose, are the most surrealist we're going to see of his work, really. Now, you have to remember that now, at 1941, Ernst and Peggy Guggenheimer came to New York, and of course he opened a gallery, and she gave him an exhibition there. But he was part of an exhibition. He didn't have a one-man show, but all of them came. I mean, at that moment, New York had Duchamp, Chagall, and it was in fact the beginning of the abstract expressionists. But most importantly, in terms of Rothko, it's his most surrealist period. And this one, for example, is called Antigone on the left here. And it's strange how he divides the canvas into the three areas. And here is the canvases very, very carefully described. This one is untitled. This is 42, 43, and this is 41, 42. And for briefly, he worked with Max Ernst. Okay, next one, because these are very interesting. This is called The Omen of the Eagle on the left, and the other one is untitled. Now we're still 1941, 42. And there's no doubt about it. He was very, very influenced and did work for a while with Max Ernst. And the next one will show you Max Ernst. And remember that he and Peggy Guggenheim, they married. They came to America and they married briefly. They didn't stay married for very long. But this is the angel of the home. The Angel of the Home, or the Triumph of Surrealism. This is Max Ernst, and this is 1938. But this one is very interesting because it tells what Max Ernst felt about coming to America. The title, I think, tells you all. It's Napoleon in the Wilderness, i.e. Max Ernst in the wilderness of the United States. And this is 41. This was painted when he got to America. And of course, as you know, he stayed here. I think he actually died in America.
New Mexico. He
Yes,
and Dorothea Tanning
that's
had a
yes,
ranch.
yes, they were. Yes, they were very close together. We were very cross when we went to America. We couldn't.
To Paris.
To Paris rather. We couldn't find the Dorothea Tannings that we were looking for, because she, I think, was one of the most successful of the surrealists. Okay, next one. Because these are the most surrealist pictures that he's ever going to paint, I think, this particular period. It's difficult to think about him as Rothko at this particular moment. And this is called Sea Fantasy, which I think is very interesting. And this is 1946, you see. And the other one is Hierarchy of Birds of 1944. Now, both of these now are in the National Gallery in Washington. And they're lovely slides, aren't they, this one?
Yeah.
They are beautiful slides. You can really see the subtlety of his color at this point. But they're very strange, aren't they? They've got these sort of other world sense to them, I think.
But we noticed that he was already starting to divide up the canvas in a certain way. Not thirds, but sort of already
it's always
organizing things based on like horizon lines.
It's very strange, isn't it? But I mean, you do get the sense of him. These are very, but you see, we've never seen, this is what was, this exhibition was so marvelous, because none of us have ever seen this group of work before. Okay, the next one, this was marvelous. I mean, look at them. Now, this is a very, very important one. This is what Christopher Rothko says was it's his mother's and father's most beloved picture. All his life, the little boy was only 6 when he died, but he always remembers seeing this. It was always in the bedroom, and this particular one is the slow swirl at the edge of the sea, and it was painted in 1944, and it was the time when his mother and father married, and he says that it is a picture. This is what Christopher says. It is actually a picture of both of them on their honeymoon. Well, I suppose you could see that these are people, but it's a bit difficult. But this one was very special for him, and this was one that they had great trouble getting back. I think it's this. This is now in MoMA. I think this one. And the other one is, of course, Gethsemane, and this is 44. And this belongs to Kate Roscoe. And this is MoMA, this one now. But this particular one was his very, very, very famous. They're famous. It was the one that they regarded as the family picture, because it's the picture of the meeting and the falling in love of the mother and father. Actually, one of the things that Kate Rothko remembers, he was a very, very, very fond and interested father, and he was good-natured. I mean, it was a happy man, and this story about him being always miserable is not really quite true when you read all the information about the family. Okay, next one. Because we're still at his most surrealist stage, and this is called Tiresias, and this is 1944, and this belongs to Christopher Rothko now. And the next one is the sacrifice of Iphigenia, and this is 42. And of course, this refers to his interest in the myths, and these are his most inspired classical paintings. But they've got the shape, haven't they? They're beginning to have, as you pointed out, Camilla, they've got this sort of architectural shape always. You get the sense, spatially,
spatializing the canvas, I suppose.
It's very, very strange, isn't it? They are very interesting. But of course, we've never seen these before, and this was the most exciting part of the exhibition. Now what I'm going to briefly show you is not very much, but these are built by Milton Avery. Now, Milton Avery was a great colorist, and he was great American painter, and he became tremendously close to Rothko. Rothko learned enormously about his color, and this particular one here is The Village by the Sea, and this is 1954. And the other one, which I think is interesting, is Milton Avery's painting of Mark Rothko in 1933. Now, it was simply the color, his color, that was, Milton Avery was much adored by the later people, mostly because of his color. Very, very interesting, mostly a landscape painter of Americans. He's lost his interest. One hardly knows of him anymore, but at the time he was very important. Now we're going to see perhaps the most important influence on Rothko next, and here it is. And this is the Red Studio. The Red Studio is 1911, and this is Matisse's Red Studio, which incidentally we owned and we sold to America. Now, according to Kate Rothko, her father used to go in front of this picture almost every day, because when they were born, when they had a birthday or something, somebody gave them tickets for, like, so that they could belong to MoMA. And this was in MoMA, and he would go and sit and look at it all the time. Think about this, because this was very, very interesting to his color, particularly. There's no doubt about it. And he says it actually came to MoMA in 1949 as a matter of interest, and literally it was the first painting that he loved. Now the one on the right is very, very important. This is Rothko's painting, Homage to Matisse. Its date is very important. It's 1954. It was the year that Matisse died. And that painting was absolutely treasured by the family. And Kate says, they both say, and the sad thing is, this is one that they never got back. When this terrible, terrible scandal of the washing, the marble scandal, this is still in the hands of private hands, and the little boy says it's the one that he remembered most specially. But look at the color and look at the red studio. And the next two are going to also be Matisse's, because these again are influential to his color later on. This particular one, the Blue Window, is at MoMA, and it's 1913. And the other one, as you remember, was 1911. The one on the right actually is now in Washington, and this is the French window at Calore at 1914. But they're both Matisse, and they were actually, this particular one was given to the state by Mrs. Whitney. Whitney's collected a lot of the Matisses because at this moment Pierre Matisse, the son of Matisse, had got a gallery in New York. And it was possible for the Americans to buy the Matisses, which they did at this time. Okay, next one. But here is one of the greatest friends. Actually, they fell out, but at the beginning they were tremendously friendship. This is Barnett Newman. Barnett Newman was 1903, born 1903, died 1970. Now, he was an intellectual. He really was almost a philosopher. And he later on became a painter. Very, very bright man. And this particular picture was his first breakthrough. And it's called One Man One. And this was a very nice detail of it. And the reason I've got the other one here on the other side, because later on in his life, he started to do sculpture. And this particular one is called the Broken Obelisk. And you're going to see this sculpture again later on. And it's going to be outside the Rothko Chapel in Houston. But this particular one was done in 1958, and 63. This is 63. I said 58, but it's 63, 67. And he at the time, he and Rothko were tremendous friends. But Rothko was one of the very, very first of the abstract expressionists who became successful. And the rich people began to buy his work. And of course, Marlborough was the major person for it. And the others actually criticized the pictures and said that they were beautiful, and they were just for the idea of the rich buying beautiful things. And there was a sort of a fight between Rothko was very upset about this, and he and Barnett Newman had a falling out. So it was sad, although they were friends to begin with, there was a falling out. Okay, the next one, because this is one of the most interesting examples of Barnett Newman's work. And I have to tell you, this particular picture was taken when we went to America, and this is now in Washington. It's in the new part, and it's the Stations of the Cross. Now, the interesting thing about these were painted in 1958 to 1966, and what they all interesting what the idea is. They felt that he did it. It was his experience, his discussion, because of course he was Jewish, of the Holocaust, and they are Christian, of course, but they are actually inspired by the terrible photographs you saw. This detail is the real color. This one here, and they're extraordinary, moving for me. You weren't particularly, were you, Camilla? You weren't sort of struck with them, not particularly, not as I was.
Oh, I think on their own, each piece on their own, they are kind of, well, they're on their own, they're intense, but then sort of all together, you had to sort of really walk around the room in a certain way. I don't know, they were all very kind of impenetrable, I suppose.
I suppose, yes, I think, but
you knew much more about him.
Yes, I was tremendously. I've always been very impressed with him, because he seems to be one of the beginnings of the kind of the later the later development. Okay, next one. Let's have a look at the next one. And this, of course, is Clifford Still. Now, we've almost forgotten about Clifford Still, but Clifford Still was very important. Important again because of colour and frankly, subject matter. Clifford Still was part of that group of the abstract expressionists, but he left New York and he went to, west. I was about to say south, but he went to California. And he spent most of the rest of his life in California. He was born in 1904. He died in 1980, and he was part of. He was also shown at Peggy Guggenheim's, but his work didn't have any titles with it. And again, he was very influential to the later Rothko, because this one on the left. Is 1947, and it just had a strange title, Y Number 2. And again, it was, as at the time, they were all of them tremendously sort of overwhelmed by the death of Martin Luther King. And on this one, it's a dedication to Martin Luther King, and you're going to see the same thing in the Barnett New Moon later on. The one on the right is also by Clifford Still, and it's called Jamais, which is never, and this is 1940. This is 1946-41. They're huge canvases. They're very, very large, and his influence was tremendous again on Rothko. But his work is always almost like landscape. He's an interesting thing, but there was no doubt this is the group that, as I say, the Uptown, when we were talking earlier, these were the sort of the Uptown group. Okay, next one, because here we have Gottlieb. Gottlieb actually is the one possibly who has really, I think his work is still, particularly the one on the right, has been particularly interesting. It's called Transforming. It was painted in 1958, and the Seer was painted in 1950. Now, Gottlieb, unlike the others, he was born in 1903, died in 1974. Yes, 1974. But he, unlike the others, had spent a lot of time in Europe, because as a boy, he sort of went as a sort of on those sort of ships that were carrying goods and so on. He went as a sort of a labourer, and he went to Paris, and he stayed in Paris probably for about 3 or 4 months, and he actually saw the work of people of the early surrealists. And when he came back to Europe, to America, he again moved briefly. I think he finally went back to New York, but he moved again into the Middle West. And the one on the left was done in the middle, and he and Rothko produced a manifesto, or what they now call a manifesto, but actually it was a letter to the Times originally, because the Times had criticized their work very strongly. And he did this sort of they did this manifesto together, and they said that the modern art, they said, to us art is an adventure to an unknown world, which can be explored only by those willing to take risks. To the artist working, it said they said it. He said it was. They were totally misunderstood, but this is what they said in the manifesto, and they both of them been reading Freud at the time. Okay, next one, because we're back to Rothko. Now this one here is The Rights of Lilith, and this is 1945, and now we're very much referring to the classical myths.
Lilith.
Yes, Lilith. Yes, you call it. I think we call it. Doesn't matter, but it's a prophecy of the archaic ritual. Oh. The one on the left, but the one on the right is really the beginning of the style that we now call Rothko. These were this is untitled, and it's 1948. Again, it belongs to Kate Stanford. But as a matter of interest, the Gottliebs are at Stanford, actually. Okay, next one. But these, we're now beginning to see the great, beautiful color. This one is untitled, and this is 1946. This is also Kate's. But the other one is beautiful, and this is the golden composition of 1949. And it was this that they were picked up by the gallery, and they were immediately successful. And it caused the others jealousy, really, to talk about them as being decorative for the wealthy, which was absolutely wrong, because the one thing it could be said about Rothko is that he was very, very, he was what we would call a socialist now. He was always very left-wing. He hated the idea of his paintings being gone to the ignorant wealthy, he said later on. But okay, next one. He was accused by this, because now we're beginning to see him come into his own. We're looking now at the early shapes, which are going to be what we now know as the Rothkos. This is untitled, 1949, and the other one is number 11, and this is 48. So this is 48, and this is 49. And you're beginning to see the way that his shapes, this particular Rothko shape that we now completely identify with. He had a studio not very far from the house in New York, and eventually he had this really, really huge studio because his work became bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, next one, because these are wonderful, and these are all beautiful. These are dated by Camilla, so these are the real color. This one is not. This is 19. This is the multiform. They're called them now. They're generally called the multiforms. He hasn't completely determined his shape yet. And this is 48. The one in the middle is 49, and the one on the right is 49. They call the one in the middle number 1. And they're all untitled, and this is number 27. But particularly look at the subtlety of the color, because one of the most interesting things about these pictures, all of them, is how he actually prepared his canvas. Now, he used cotton duck, but he actually, according to the Sun, when they actually started to clear out his studio, he had absolutely masses and masses of turpentine, and he used oil color almost like watercolor. Now, all of these background shapes, background colors here, many sort of layers of color all the time to create this really incredibly subtle colors. These are quite remarkable. Again, next one. They were gorgeous. Now, this is Camilla Lesser took the details. I want you to look very carefully at this, because this is the way you see the extreme subtlety of the colours. Look at this one, for example. It very, very, very slightly changes its colour, and then gradually becomes this wonderful golden yellow, and this astonishingly sort of pale greyish white here. They really are beautiful. This is 1950. It's a year after the others. And you begin to see, now we're looking at the real, of what we now think of as Rothko. Now, these are marvellous, these slides, because actually they are details. You see the one on the left, which is number 8, that was 1949. And the detail of this one of here is here. And this is number 18, and this is 51. And again, the detail is up here. And there's got this interesting separation of kind of a grey. But again, look at the background of this particular one. You see that yellowish kind of colour. And again, different colours all the way through. And the colours, when I was there, the thing that was so amazing, he actually succeeded in what he wanted to do. Because when you're in front of them, the colours seem to come, the colours come to you. You're in a different kind of space, weren't you, Camilla? Did you notice that too? That strange sense that they came out at you.
Yeah. Yeah, they do become sort of three-dimensional.
They do. They're quite remarkable.
Places. Yeah.
I don't know how. It's the subtlety of the colour, I suppose. Okay, next one. Because here you see him getting here. This one is 49 again. This is actually in the Chrysler Museum. And the one on the first one belongs to Chris Roscoe. And the sorry, it was the next one, the Chrysler. And this is a detail. And these are 51. Again, you see, interestingly, you can see the details of this one up here and this one here at the bottom. But look at the subtlety of this. You can just, Camilla's shown it to us here. You just get this, the way that, as Christopher says, he used oil paint almost like watercolor. These are beautiful. I love his blues, actually. This is untitled 1949. Now, this is the first time he begins to use acrylic. He starts using acrylic in 1948-49. He is a mixture, because you see, before this, he used all sorts of things. I mean, you've got tempera, like the egg base, in much of the colour. The oil is, he really mixes his own colours. He doesn't get them from a tube, is what I'm saying. If the colour comes, and he mixes them up with all these different stuff. The one on the left is number 5. It's 49. And he just wanted a sort of a dialogue between himself and the onlooker. This is what he was trying to express. Most astonishing. Okay, next one, because they're really, really coming. Look at the one. Look at this blue. I love his blues, actually. This is it's actually, they're just telling you what the one is made of. It's blackish green, a blue tone of 1957. But again, note the detail. Look at the subtlety of this. They really are quite remarkable. Now, sadly, he's getting a big reputation now. Okay, next one. And suddenly, you know, the family's got some money. And this is the Untitled of 1955. And again, the same applies, a detail up here. And this is a detail of this one here. And this is 57, actually. This is 55, 57. And this one is now at Fort Worth Museum. This one on the right. At the time, the few of the museums buying were mostly being bought by the very, very wealthy. Okay, next one. This is beautiful. Something about that red, isn't it? It's almost orange. Do you see what I mean by the way the shapes seem to come forward when you're standing in front of them? His point was always that he wanted his onlookers to spend 18 inches away from them. He wanted you to be very, very close to them. And there's no doubt about it. This particular color envelops you as you're standing in front of them. As I say, we were there for 4 hours, weren't we? It was amazing.
Yeah.
These are amazing. This one is number 15. This is 1958. And this is green on blue with earth green and white of 56. And again, the detail is there. This is absolutely, completely developed. Now, sadly, it is he got a bigger studio. He was working away from home, but at this time the family was still together. And as I say, Kate Rothko said on Sundays she always went. He looked after the children or her, and they used to go to the museums together on Sunday. Okay, next one. They are so beautiful. This one is orange and red on red. This is 57. And the black and red on brown is 58. So we're really now completely, as they are completely the Rothkos as we know them. Now these really now, most of these are at the National Gallery, Washington. Okay, next one. And I'll explain in a minute why. This is number 9. This is white on black. And again, a detail. Now, the problem was that after he died, well, we'll get there in a second, because I want to show you the next one, how we got the Seagram building. Now, this is the Seagram building. And this was the building, of course, it was so extraordinary. He was given this enormous commission by Seagram, by the building, this is the first of the great dark red ones that we've now got. The story is that he went. This was the most expensive and the most extraordinary building. It was Mies van der Rohe, and he'd never had a commission like this. And the story is that his wife and he were, when he was given the commission, they were supposed to go into a sort of almost like an office room, but eventually they were put into the restaurant, and he and his wife were given a meal. And he came back, so Kate says, absolutely furious. He was screaming with rage because this particular restaurant, I mean, it was sort of the most expensive food, like caviar and all sorts of things like this. And his whole point of his work being sort of decorative for what he referred to as the hideous elite that were going to look at it. He came back and he rang up straight away and he took them off. He brought them back. He said, with great difficulty, by all accounts, the amount of money he'd been given the deposit for, not the complete amount of money, but he gave it back. And I gather with a certain amount of difficulty. But the one on the right I thought is interesting. I put it on because it's Lee Krasner. And it's Lee Krasner's pictures, which were used to decorate the same building, but it's a different room. It's the mezzanine grill, and one is called Moontide. and they're 1960 and 1961. So when he got the when Rothko gave them back, Krasnell was invited to. I thought that was interesting. Okay, next one. And here is this picture of him at this time. And this is he's in front of number 7. This is number 7. Now, in 1950, I think it was 1950 the first time, he and his wife came to Europe, and they visited, of course, they went to Italy and so on, but they came to London, and they became very friendly with Herbert Reed, who was the head of the Tate at the time. And this was a very important relationship because he fell madly in love with the Turners. Put the next one on, Lovey, and we can see the Turners. And these particular Turners were there. And one, of course, is the steamboat of a harbour's mouth, 1842, and the other one is Sunrise with the Sea Monster of 1845. And he was absolutely astonished by the Turners. So he did this wonderful thing. Trip to London, I said 1959, 50, it was 59. And then he came back again in 1966. And he gave the Tate, the Seagram building. Now, this is something I feel very strongly about. I'm still not very, very clear. I was talking to Jenny Fernando, and she said and we must be careful about this. When they come back at the moment, you see, the Rothkos, the Seagram Rothkos are in Paris. They're coming back, and they're coming back to Tate Britain, but they eventually go to Tate Modern. And I feel very cross about this because the reason that he gave them to the Tate was that they could be in the next room to the Turners, and the Turners, of course, are in Tate Britain. He had tremendous trouble and very, very careful with Reed to make sure that the light was absolutely right for the Seagram pictures. Let's have the next one, and you get an idea. But this actually is a photograph that was taken in Tate Modern, not in Tate Britain. But here there are 9 of them altogether. They're quite remarkable. And I think if Jenny is right, and when they come back, they briefly going into Tate Britain, I think we all go and have a look at them because they are eventually going back to Tate Modern, which he didn't really want. And here they do look marvelous. Now, the really, really, really tragic thing, and it does become a tragedy we're talking about, they arrived at the Tate the day that he committed suicide in 1970. Isn't that extraordinary? There's a detail, of course, of this one. Okay, next one, and you'll see them. They're black on maroon, and they were begun in 58. And he cancelled contract in 1960. And he gave them to the Tate in 1969. And as I say, they came, as it happens, on the day that he died. Okay, let's have the next one. And these were painted later. These were painted in 66. He says, I'm interested only in expressing basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and death. This is what he says. Now, he had an aneurysm. I've got it written down. I'm not good at this, and so you'll have to take over, Camilla, when I tell you what it is. He had this awful aneurysm thing, but before, not quite yet, because the next one I want to talk about is his great last commission. He had this enormous, I think it was an old warehouse or something, had this enormous studio. And here we see him mocking up a third of the size of the studio, because he was getting, is the one before, there should be, can you go back one, dear?
Oh,
I think
you said no.
No, you're right. I put this on wrong. Can we go forward one, and then we'll come back to this, because this is what I wanted to show you. This, of course, is Dominique and John de Benil, and this is 1968, and this is them here in the fine arts, and of course the Rothko beside them. Now they gave Rothko this commission for it. It's very interesting because, of course, both he and Newman Jewish, but it was in fact originally it was a Catholic for a Catholic church, and she gave him the commission for what is now called the Rothko rooms. Now, if we go back, I can show you. This is him at that time. This is him at this time, and this is him mocking up the shape, the scale of this extraordinary commission. Okay, next one we can begin to see them. And this one at the end, this is the inauguration of the now what is the Rothko Chapel. But of course, it was 1971. He never saw it. He died the year before. Okay, next one. And now we can see it. And you remember I was talking to you about the Barnett Newman obelisk, and here it is in the front, and it's beautifully done with water, and there is the building. Now this particular building was so carefully worked out with the architect. It's quite remarkable. The architect was of course it's the Barnett Newman, and it really is quite remarkable. Well, after he completed the series, he suffered this aneurysm, the aortic, is that right? The aortic aneurysm. And this had a devastating effect on him. It says that he became completely depleted, and he was very difficult. He left the house. They lived in a brownstone house. He left the house, and he lived and died actually in the studio. And when how he did, he took some pills, and then he cut his arms, and the blood, by all accounts, he was lying in this blood. He was discovered by a neighbor in 1970. But this, I'm very glad to say that Bill and I, years and years ago, we did go and see it, and it is quite remarkable. It is you have to be completely silent. It really has got this whole sense of being surrounded by a sort of strange space that you really can't describe. They're almost black. They're very beautiful. Okay, next one. This gives you a slight idea. The design was very important. And again, the lip, he gets very cross when people put too much light on his work. And this was very carefully done. And it was this, he never saw it, you see, because it was never finished until a year after his death. And the next one is going to be the last one. These are really rather beautiful, because I wanted to show you his watercolors. And this particular pair of watercolors were the Portland landscape. Now, when he married Nell in 1933, the family were they were still in Portland, and as I said, they were in pharmacy, and he went down to see them, but the family were completely shocked because he didn't stay in the house. They stayed in a sort of camp, and they sort of hitchhiked their way from New York to Portland, and he did these watercolors then. So these watercolors were 1933. And he gave them to the family afterwards. Now, after he had that terrible illness, the doctor would not allow him to paint. And so for 6 months, he wasn't able to paint. And this is when he started these extraordinary watercolors. The next one you can see, and here they are. And I will end with these, although I really should have shown you the black and the greys. And these are the watercolors, and they're painted between sort of 68 and 70. And there are masses of them. Now, this is the time, the terrible time, when he died. The Frank Lloyd's what they did were they'd taken all the pictures. There were something like 700 of them, an enormous number, and the family, he before he died, he'd wanted a foundation, and this was completely ignored by the Marlborough. And the most terrible thing, really, probably, was that they were left literally with nothing. And then a really ghastly thing happened. He killed himself. 6 months later, his 48-year-old wife died of a stroke. And in the next room was the 6-year-old child watching television. And there was Kate and Christopher, and everybody behaved appallingly. The people that he'd made a will, and he'd given his friend, another painter called Stamus, and his friend called Rees, to look after his will, and particularly his foundation, and both of them were employed by by Marlborough, and they didn't help at all. And as I say, this young woman of 19 years old took on the Marlborough, and astonishingly, she gave them, because one thing that he wanted more than anything else was this foundation. And what happened in the end when she got them back, and after all, it took 7 years, and by this time she was married, and she was a doctor, and she actually gave them to the museums that had shown Rothko in his lifetime, but there was something like 700 of them, and it was fantastic. But it's an extraordinary story. Okay, next one. I want you to,